My name is William MacArthur. I live in Arizona, but I know a lot about East Texas because the company is based out of Austin and out of the DC area. So my background, just real quick, I don't have an About Me slide. I used to work at GoDaddy for 8 years, then RiskIQ, and now I'm here. There you go. If you have any questions, I have contact information. So worm charming. Very interesting concept, and we'll go through it. What I'm looking for is, malware lures, everything that's kind of going on right now. I know a few of you guys have been probably slammed with Emotet. Yeah, it's nonstop. It's interesting because I already turned this talk in, and then that popped up, which is kind of perfect. So, sorry. So client-side attacks, it's just all over the place. It's just getting worse and worse out there. Seems like we're not getting any better at it for some reason. So worm charming. So it's a competitive sport in East Texas. It's a real-world skill. You can see I got Uncle Rico there, and basically what he's trying to do is make vibrations on the ground, and worms come up. And so that's an actual real competition. As I got into that, started looking deeper and deeper and deeper into that like a threat, and it gets really interesting. So here you go. Here's a little live example of what's happening. That's the method of that the individual wants to use to attract the worms. So on the agenda, what we're doing is what kind of lures do we want? Where do we find these lures? And how can we dissect them in an appropriate way? And which ones are interesting? Not just to me, but which ones are interesting to your specific use case. So the most prolific malware carriers, PDFs, Office, Java, Flash, just scripts inside of archives, like those ACE files, that are always around doing bad things. Because the reason why these are the typical carriers is because they're pretty easy to hide. You start paying attention to the different type of exploits out there, different tricks and tactics, and I'm sure all of you are real happy with some of the red team people that put out tools that are free and for practice only. Thank you very much. Every time one of those comes out, we got to make detection. Just be nice to your blue team. So basically, I can't pronounce it. The Matrovsky. I don't speak Russian, but things hidden within things, hidden within things. So a lot of the times we're getting lures like the most recent one everyone's probably heard of. The Snowden ones from Emotet are just a perfect example of what just happened, right? Or a world event happens, and then all of a sudden everything just shows up in your spam box, and for some reason people click on these. Not really sure why. It's a constant battle, but people do click on them. So you have a zip file, and then inside the zip file you're going to have docs, or you're going to XLM, or you're going to have some malicious content within there, hidden inside documents, basically. So where to dig? We can spend probably the whole time talking about where to dig, but the most obvious ones, hybrid analysis, virus total. You can pull stuff off Twitter, RSS feeds, your human int, your human network, which is probably one of the better, most high fidelity indicators or threat methods or tracking that you can use. Mapping infrastructure. So I'm not sure how many of you guys do this, but this is very interesting, considering I used to work at RiskIQ, and so I took some skills there and kind of keep building off them. And if you use passive DNS, for example, passive DNS is a huge, huge thing. VirusTotal has it. There's a whole bunch of open source places that have this information. You don't want to just blindly trust it, but you can start making notes as part of your process. Enterprise email spool. What better place to see what threats are actually hitting your environment? And then we get to virus total intelligence, which is what we chose. There's a lot of options that you can do with it. So it's pretty much, you know, one of the easiest things I've ever encountered. I never even had virus total intelligence until this year. Wow, was I doing it wrong? But if you do have the opportunity, go ahead and try VTI. If not, there's a bunch of, you know, open source stuff like Malice. It's MALICE. It's like an elk stack. It's like the poor man's VTI with like ClamAV and all that. So here in this document, or this little graph, that's the intake of virus total. Roughly, it's a little bit higher now, but about 1 million a day. So I mean, that's a pretty steady amount of samples coming in. And here's the distribution. So no surprise here that, you know, the binaries, the PE files, are going to be number one. That's where a lot of people spend most of their time in. You're seeing a lot of people because it's the big sexy thing to do is the binaries. What we kind of focus on, and kind of one of my specialties, is the traffic, like traffic delivery mechanisms. You know, how did it get there in the first place? So if you think about that, it's how did it get there in the first place? So if you're already stopping it, or if you're only looking at the end result, like, you know, the loaders and the droppers getting to the other files, you're still missing half the picture. How did it get there in the first place? What's it connected to? You know, what's the threat actor infrastructure? I mean, you start building out, if you just think like that, you start building out an instant threat notes, or, you know, start threat tracking, which allows you to do additional hunting in your network. You start looking up the infrastructure IPs and seeing what's touching it, and you'll be surprised what you uncover. So what we focus on, though, is the PDF. That's like their number one. That's like our number one fun area. But you know, anything with documents, anything that's like the loaders or the delivery mechanism, as I stated, is where I kind of spend most of my time in our whole company. We use the like PE, you know, files, as I call it, catch-alls, just in case we miss a delivery, which then that's where I spend most of my time. So this is exactly what we do. Feel free to, you know, take pictures of this, because this is kind of, you know, everything's open source and free here. You can just pop in, instead of VT, toss in whatever your preferred data. So we take a lot of RSS, the Twitter, and the GitHub, anything that goes on there, right? We put it in our threat ingester, which is another open source free item. And you can just put in, you know, like the Twitter lists, stuff like that. You can just put it in there, and it's going to collect all this information all day long. And then it goes into something called ThreatKB, which we still have, that's alpha, but it's a place that you can start, you know, customizing like what you want to do with the data afterwards. We have the YARA. We specifically stick in YARA. YARA is great. Also do a lot of Saracata, just to throw that in there for the, you know, C2 traffic. But it's all like Aurora DB, and, you know, then we have machine learning and all sorts of stuff. The most interesting thing here is also the VT file scanning section here. And you can see these days right here. So if you actually go in VirusTotal and take a look at any samples, and sometimes you see a sample hasn't been touched since 2017, but you just received it and you kind of don't know what's going on. Well, do a favor to everyone and just click reanalyze. That's essentially what we're doing every 10 days, just to keep it up to date. So, you know, people do have triggers depending on how many detections go off on a sample, and they might get an email, and it might help your other analysts around the world, which everyone knows we all need help against the bad guys. So, I mean, that's a pretty decent thing to do, I think. So, good vibrations. As you can see here, we got the little bird guy, and he's going like this. And he's being very specific towards an area. So this is essentially the same thing as what you saw the tuba player doing. he's just making vibrations. The reason why he's doing that is because raindrops come down, hit the ground, worms come up. So I know as silly as it sounds, I just learned that like a month ago. So one of the most interesting things here is the shaft at the bottom, which is this section. And all I mean right here is a bunch of garbage. It's just a bunch of junk. You notice how he's just sitting right there, or she, sorry, in this certain area, and we don't know, but there's a worm there or something. But see how it's ignoring the rest of this junk around it? It's being very specific, and that's what we're trying to do, is find these very specific, items within all this 1 million uploaded content that happens at VirusTotal. So I'll give you an example of it. So here's an example, and I'm pretty sure you guys can see it, but all this junk, I'm colorblind, but all this junk right here is being matched by this regex right here. And then you can see the stuff that's not highlighted is actually showing you the specific DDE auto, and it's showing you the whole commands and actually what the bad guy's trying to accomplish. There's the simple regex I just tossed in right there, which is just highlighting the stuff that we don't need, and it makes it kind of obvious, right? So I mean, I like this method. I mean, I think it's pretty silly of the bad guys to do. You start adding in a bunch of junk code, well, we're going to find a pattern, right? Like, that's what we're all pretty good at. We're probably going to look for something in here as a pattern if you want to do a detection rule. I mean, there's various methods that you can do. You can look for DD auto. You can look for all this stuff, obfuscated. There's just tons of options. And then they have to execute it, so you're always looking for cmd.exe or wmic or MSI exec. So now we can move to MIME evasions. So a lot of people think that you're going to also see, hey, here's RTF or here's some type of magic at 0. Well, you're probably missing stuff, just to let you know. Not everything is Office at 0 and RTF at 0. If you do that, make another rule that's kind of more loose. You'll catch a lot of more additional stuff that you would otherwise normally miss. So specifically, we're going over the RTF byte nibble in this next section. So in April 2008, it's going over a 0 day in the wild and kind of just showing you guys how some of this stuff all comes into play here. Yet again, here's another simple regex. So you can see right here, pattern matching tool. You can see a bunch of the shaft/garbage, and then you can see we're getting down to the goodies right here. So real world examples of this method, and right before I get into that, the one thing that I want to make sure that everyone knows is the whole 100 million or 1 million samples for VirusTotal, we end up cutting down that 1 million down to 2,500. You have to know what you want to look at. So looking at those documents, we're cutting that million down to just a small amount. And that's still a large amount, right? 2,500 samples, no one can look at that, in a day. I mean, you can have machine learning and all sorts of automation doing that, but the real work comes in that, the last 5% of the automation cycle where you need human interaction. And, some of these we, can spend a whole month or 6 months and start tracking and doing infrastructure stuff. We can spend 6 months on one sample. Fortunately, we don't all have that luxury to do that. But, so if you're looking for something besides documents, you can do the same method. On our site, we actually have the rules that we use for documents, for Word documents, just in case anyone's curious. It's at Awesome YARA. That's the repo that we actually manage, which, YARA references. So we have a lot of that stuff in there. And one more thing, if you do use VTI and you are doing hunt rules, don't just trust like hexadecimal or the string and ASCII. Do all three of them, because just like everywhere else, people have bugs. So sometimes you miss some of the documents. We've noticed kept having to contact them. Nothing against them, we just all have bugs. It's a lot of data that they give us. So these examples right here, let's go over some of them. So let's go over this VB script vulnerability one. And I'm gonna go from the least impressive to the most impressive. So we caught all this stuff just ahead of time before anyone even said anything. And that's the whole purpose of this whole process of taking everything, collecting certain file types. So we already had a lot of this content. So here's a CVE. You can get the date. The sample's uploaded on 4/18 from a US-based source. Campaign launches, 4/25. And then the next uploads for this content, they don't even appear until 5/9. And they're coming from India, Italy, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and the US. Also Korea, DE, FR, and CN. And that's on 5/10. So the initial AV detections on this, they were pretty good, 16. That's pretty decent considering, it's a 0 day in the wild. So the worm, charming section in this is this whole the RTF nibble, and you can see the detections evolutions here. Starts off and then kind of goes to a little bit more after a while. So using like the method of collecting stated, you would have this ahead of time. The second it's uploaded, you would have this and see the 15. Here's something else that's interesting. On that sample, you'll notice that the AV vendors that are in VirusTotal will all have this, not all of them, but they have like very similar, descriptions in here. Just so you know, that's because Bitdefender is the #1 OEM of AV stuff. So a lot of people use their naming just to kind of unfog that, whole antivirus, let's name stuff our own name thing. So the second one, this is the Flash. This is the Flash vulnerability. And so this sample was uploaded on VTN 1/22/2018. It was from South Korea. And Kaspersky and Zone Alarm, they had their heuristics go off on this. So they identified the 0 day. Then you have the Issue Makers Lab. They discover it in the wild and then they publicize it, right? And then you see later on uploads coming from different sources. And then by 2/5, 20 vendors have proper detection on it. And so what we were looking for here is the RTF with Flash on it, and then it exits on the debugger detections. Here you go right here, and then you get Simon. If you guys don't follow him on APT type stuff in Korea, he's the guy. So you can see it's pointing out right here, there's no patch, it's publicized, it's out in the open now, which kind of scares us all because then we have to go to work no matter what time of day it is. And here's the detections evolution again. So 2, and then you can see the date, and it's going up and up and up. So using that method of just collecting, documents and such, you would have it when it's at 2, which is a good point, considering that a lot of people see 2 or 1 or 0 detections, and then they think it's a false positive. That is not the right idea. That's not the right frame set, I believe. Stuff with the less detections is the most interesting parts of like our job, I think. Things that are 0 detections, but we know that's malicious, that's where you kind of want to spend more time on. You don't need to announce to the world on Twitter that you have all the information. That might be my threat intelligence type background. I don't like to share a lot of stuff. But only with the good guys. But put it out on Twitter, bad guys can read too. Here's an example of the YARA rule that we use, just so people can see the debugger detection. This is what caught it. And this is what we were looking for up here in the YARA. And then some of the stuff specific towards like the hunting, like virus total hunting, and then also you can customize, YARA to do what you want. So this is the most impressive one. So that's why I saved it for last. So we're doing a Microsoft.NET, code injection vulnerability, and yay, see that a lot, right? Client-side stuff. So this one's in 2017, but it's a perfect example of, a sample being uploaded to VirusTotal with zero detection, like we just talked about. Nothing's going on. 8:24 to 9:12 midday, there are 11 additional scans on it, from different places. And this is, the bad guy testing, right? More than likely, right? Bad guy testing. Still zero, no hits. Then FireEye published its campaign, or puts out its information on 9/12. So they probably, I would suggest, either also got it at the same time, or they do a lot of endpoint stuff. So depending on what their setup is, then you kind of see like the sheeple effect, right? Someone has it, you don't have it, you get yelled at from some person saying the AV company, is not covering it. All of a sudden it comes in, and then now you got to do your threat hunting inside your environment to see what all, did it get in, why didn't we detect it if it did, and then post-mortem time and all sorts of fun. So this is the worm charting section at the bottom here. We're just looking for evasive magic. So the RTF and OLE plus a new line. And this is not RTF at 0. This is just RTF inside of a file. So if you did have RTF or Office docs or at 0 in your YARA detection, you would miss this unless you had other rules in place. Here's an example just showing the date and time, the timestamp. Here's the different times it was attempted to see what was going on. And there's the detections evolution of that. So we have, we had it for a while, and then all of a sudden, poof, it's up. So that whole method of collecting, you don't just have to do this on VirusTotal. Any open source. I mean, that's like, I can't say that enough. There's so much open source out there. You just have to know what's high fidelity or not. So we just released this a little while ago. If you just go to labs.inquest.net, there's a ton of stuff up there that we wanted to give back to the community for free. There's a lot of things for Office documents that a lot of people don't have. It's not detonating malware, stuff like that. You can go inside the documents, and we actually take the layers and rip it apart instantly so that you can see what's on the inside of it without having to infect your box or detonate it. Maybe you don't have a VM set up. You don't want to infect anything. So this is all the stuff that we have up here. It's a document dissector explorer. We call it DFI. So there's 1 million samples up there, and that whole process I just explained about grabbing all these Word docs, we put them in there every day from VirusTotal. So if you don't have a VTI account, this is a free source for you to go, and feel free to go and grab all the Word docs or anything else you want to go after. And if you need an API key, just contact me. I mean, it's free, but if we get hammered with too many requests, there's always bad guys out there. A lot of YARA generators and helpers. That's really like where I spend most of my time at. So a lot of these tools in here are just little things that you can put in your workflow. Then the reputation aggregation. So that's a rep feed. So think of like all the IOCs and all the stuff that's out there. A lot of it we validate, like the sources and high fidelity or not. If there's anything that's not included in there, feel free to send me an email. But we have like URL houses in there and such. And that's just the reputation feed. Then we have the IOC aggregation, and that's going to be back towards the whole collection of everything, the whole gambit of whatever we whatever we deem to be most important to gather. It could be friends, anyone that puts out indicators that, will validate. We like to keep it wide so that people can take that data and then do what they want with it. So there's always updates on it. It's based on API, so it's all built on an API, and then the front end happens. So it's the way it should be in Python, yes. Here's some examples, just so you guys can see. You can just do a curl. You can start taking a look at the DFI, start doing hex case examples, all sorts of things, and it'll spit it back out. So you don't have to worry about doing the no case or the -i and stuff like that. Unit triggers. This is pretty much self-explanatory. If you actually mess with malware and YARA, this will kind of make it a lot easier for you to catch those nibbles that we just talked about with the RTF, byte nibble action. You're going to want to have JQ installed if you do use this. There's also a UI if you don't like command line, but it's up to you. Base64 regex generation example. So you can see bad guys end up doing this a lot, right? And then they'll go and hide it like this. So you might see a string and want to know, hey, like I have the plain text human readable form. Let's toss it in here and get this form too. So if people try to bypass, you have both detections on it. And then you can get really silly with it and start doing crazy stuff. And then have this, which I don't recommend being a rule, but besides a local version. So I had to put Oprah on here, because why not? Here's some of these the functions though I just made real quick. I'm gonna put these online so people, like on our GitHub, so people can grab them instead of typing them all out, because it's kind of annoying. But you can do just as simple as this, and then you can get the output of anything that you want and label it. I use this in my workflow. I like to stay in the command line. I like to not go in the GUI sometimes, well, most of the time. But this is just a precursor for functions for you to put in your alias, just put in your bash RC or bash profile. There's also Python wrapper I'll be sending out soon as well, and documenting the API. It's just a lot of work. And I'm open for communication always. I think I talked to a few of you, and I track a lot of stuff, APTs to everything. Just to remind you, I do public and private sector work. So we do, yes. We do watch over a lot of the, DoD, pretty much the DoD, JRSS, all that type stuff. So we're doing government and non-government work. So any APT or anything that seems interesting, please hit any of us up. I'd like to thank, everyone on that board, my colleagues and stuff, and then I also want to thank my wife. Hi, Felicia. She came here. She's also a forensicator and works at, she has the coin, so don't come to our house and connect to our internet. But yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you guys. I can talk forever on open source or items, but didn't know if anyone had questions or I made it really confusing as I was going through for anyone. But you can hit me up at anti-exploit as well. I'm in the community all the time. I don't sleep. Hey, thanks a lot for listening to me, guys.
Thank you, Will.